Greetings and welcome to the session on crisis communication management. I'm Susan Fournier, and I'm currently the Alan Questrom Professor and Dean at Questrom School of Business at Boston University.
Hi, I'm Dean Fournier. Hi, everyone. My name is Seulah Han. I am COM09. Some of you might know me as Vicky. That was my middle name that I used until I graduated. Now I don't really do that anymore. I go by Seulah, which is my first name. I was born and raised in Seoul, Korea, educated in the U.S., had my first job in New York, now back in Asia. So first back to home, Korea, and now in Hong Kong. I do what we call strategic communications. And I do a lot of corporate reputation work, which means that we safeguard corporations and brands, and also help them manage and navigate risks, issues, and crisis.
I'm going to kick us off and just introduce the topic, which I hope you find very interesting. And I hope you also develop a deep appreciation for how critically important this topic is for maintaining a successful business. I mean, at a very, very, very simple level, corporations need to do two things to be successful. They have to generate revenues, and to do that, they have to have products and services that people want and that they want to pay for. And that's sort of one side of the equation. Can we get the top line in? The second thing, though, that corporations really need to do to be successful is to also manage the riskiness of those cash flows. Managing risk is fundamental. So I want to very much welcome Seulah today. Very, very, very indebted to you for your expertise and lengthy career in this space to help us understand, what we might do to fruitfully confront these issues and challenges, and how to manage the risks that we may confront, how to mitigate them should they take hold, but also importantly, how to recover from them after we've gone through an episode, if you will, and really importantly, how to prevent them at the outset from even taking place. So I'm going to try to focus our discussion on three main phases, if you will, of an effective risk management system: the preparation phase, the response phase, and then the recovery phase. And I welcome your thoughts throughout this and also questions that you may want to add in. So thank you so much for agreeing to participate. So maybe we could just start out then with this preparatory phase. I think the logic is somewhat the same as it is in medicine. The best cure is actually prevention. And in the risk space, the best thing we can do is just to never get in this situation in the first place. A very simple thought, but I anticipate that it's a very complicated thing to accomplish. How does one prepare for and try to prevent risk from taking hold as a crisis, a full-blown crisis? What is if you were to think maybe first level, what is the most important thing here that you might do?
Maybe just thank you for that. Maybe just taking a step back away from that very heavy question that you just gave me or threw at me. I think that the sources of risk kind of come from three different categories broadly. So that could be, I guess, more of an impact, of a risk. That's operational, financial, reputational. Those three are the most kind of three bigger pillars that companies will focus on when they look at the impact of potential risks, issues, or crises. Now, sources of those risks will be various. Like you said, there are too many things out there that are just waiting for you to kind of touch and become something that's a very kind of detrimental to your business. It could be internal forces, external forces, something you can control, something you cannot control. But just going back to your question about what can we do? What's the big one thing that brands and corporations might need to focus on in terms of preventing a crisis or risk or issue, is having a very strong set of values. As a brand, as a corporation, as a personality in general, if you have a very robust and strict set of guiding lights, values, the ethics, the principles that you go by and really respect, doing the right thing as a company, giving back to your communities. What are you really trying to protect as a business? What can you not compromise? If you have that strong set of values and beliefs, then that will be your guiding light to kind of hold you through from preventing an issue, making sure that any type of issues or risks are well mitigated or navigated, or in the recovery phase that you're perceived as a genuine brand, personality, corporation. The stakeholders will be willing to re-engage with you and put in more trust in you in the long run.
Seulah, could you go into a little more depth and help us understand what you mean by values and how that is going to help? You mentioned things like it will help provide a guiding light. In the context of crisis management and prevention, what perhaps an example might be helpful of some particular values that would be important to align around?
Yes, certainly. And that's a difficult question too, because it will be varied from one case to another. But I think broadly, or maybe just giving an example here, I had a client that was facing a very large case that involved hundreds of consumers that were impacted by their product. And that meant that they were facing legal issues, a lot of lawsuits brought against them, disputes with their vendors, partners. They also had a parent company that was looking from the global headquarters to make sure that the issue is contained within the market. They had law enforcement, the regulators, the lawmakers that were also making sure that the company was, helping out the victims, the consumers, making sure that they're putting in place the right preventive measures for the next steps. So that meant a lot of different, categories of risks and issues they're dealing with. Naturally, a lot of the companies, when they face issues big enough that are like that, they would eventually look at the legal aspect of the issue. So they would look at what's the potential legal issues, what are the disputes that might be brought against me, the health of the business, the financial, operational impact of that issue. So we took a step back from there and we said, what are you trying to really protect? Is that the financial health only, or is it your employees, your people? Or are you a brand that wants to also do the right thing, serve the broader community, make sure that you can use this as an opportunity to, validate, confirm your commitment in the market, that you want to be a responsible corporate citizen, and you're demonstrating that through this, experience or an issue. Because how you will respond to such an issue will also show to the general public, the consumers, the lawmakers, the government, who you are as a brand and what you believe. And the first thing we did, together with the client, together with the law partners, the legal counsel, was to write up a credo. So we made sure that we had a set of guidelines, the key principles, something that is really true to what they are as a consumer brand, that will be the most focal point of any decision making that will come their way. That issue actually ran through for years, and that credo actually really helped the company navigate difficult situations where there are a lot of distractions, noises, a lot of surprises that came their way. They were able to maintain their calm and make sure that they're sticking to the promise they've made as a company in the very beginning. And that's been really helpful. So it's hard to define what those set of beliefs are exactly, but that needs to be true to what the company is trying to offer to their stakeholders, their consumers, their partners, and also what they want to do at the end of the day as a business.
That is so helpful. Thank you very much for bringing that alive with that example. That's fantastic. So as we're preparing then as an organization for ideally preventing risk exposure, so one of the things then that we're going to do is to think about our operations, to think about our reputation, to think about our financial health, and to try to identify factors to keep an eye on. Is that helpful? And perhaps that turns into some kind of a dashboard, if you will.
Yes,
and
definitely.
So maybe then you could help us, and again, use an example if it's useful, but help us think about how we then put this together. We have our credo. Now we need a device by which we can monitor and try to keep an eye out for increasing risk exposure, perhaps, or just predominant risk factors that are always going to be present that we just need to keep an eye on. So how would you set this dashboard up if that's a useful construct?
Yeah, that's a great point. So you need to, in order to prevent any risks or issues, you need to know your vulnerabilities. And that comes from different, work that you could do. First up would be data intelligence gathering. You need to know the market you're going into and operating, expanding in. You need to know your audience inside and out. And that doesn't happen through just, quick media analysis or media monitoring. You need to know where your risks lie from assessing yourself, meaning you need to do an internal review of what can be improved, what's going well, what can we do better in terms of operation, financial, communications, and also ESG, including that there, but also external factors too. What are people, the important stakeholders, the media, talking about our industry, ourselves as a business, what changes are happening in the market landscape. And when you do that, you need to make sure that you're putting your local in-market lens on. I believe a lot of our audience here, people who are, listening to our conversation today, are alumni of BU or students of BU maybe. So I hope a lot of us, have that both international perspective and also the local lens that we can put on when we look at different situations and issues. And that's exactly what good issue preparedness requires. You need to make sure that you know the market from the local perspective as well. So when you look at the data, you need to make sure that you set up a good parameter to make sure that you can capture those elements. And I look after the North Asia region, which means that includes the Greater China region, that's mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, obviously my home country, and Japan. So you can imagine the landscape here, the market region is dynamic. It's a breathing and living thing. So we talked, Dean, earlier that, rules change every single day. So you need to be, up to speed on what's happening outside your company. Make sure that you are following through. There are a lot of geopolitical risks at play. The anti-foreign capital sentiment against multinationals. There's frustration, aggression across different groups of, the wealth, the haves that have not, the capitalism. There's high expectations against multinationals to do better in terms of complying with regulations and delivering value to their society, nationalism, as you can imagine, in our region in Asia, and a lot more. So in order to capture a lot of these elements, you need to look at the data. You need to be gathering your intelligence. And you can do that in different ways. One thing that's a bit more complex will be looking at your stakeholders. Who are your friends? Who are your foes? You need to keep your enemies close, like everyone says. You need to make sure that which stakeholders are important or against you, and make sure that you understand their agenda, their priorities, and their implications and relevance to your business and how that might change how you function. Also, another thing you can do is data collection, and you don't just do that by primary research. You need to set up kind of different tiers. So you can do primary research, setting up a dashboard, looking at data points that's more, I guess, the quantitative and more easier to measure, I guess, across a time span. Look at how you're doing against benchmarks of your peers, your colleagues in the industry, your competitors, and see how the landscape's changing. Also secondary, more qualitative, you can do interviews with your stakeholders, the thought leaders, the opinion leaders like yourself, Dean, to make sure that you're, getting different perspectives and insights from different players to make sure that you're not siloed and you're kind of in your own bubble. You need to look outside to also understand what's out there for you.
Well, that sounds like a very full-time job.
It is.
That is an incredibly involved practice. Thank you so much. I mean, the layers of data, the qualitative, the quantitative, the identification in general of the vulnerabilities, which, as you mentioned, as a multinational corporation, just multiplies the complexity of the task, fivefold, tenfold, and that this is square zero. So that becomes really important. So even those factors that we cannot control need to be monitored because they may rear their heads and require response. So I love that the probability, the severity, the impact, the controllability. That's a great dashboard. Thank you very much. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned a kind of a category, if you will, of risks that is increasingly becoming part of the world of doing business. And you mentioned ESG risks, and just to pause for a second, that's environment, social, and governance. A lot of people just at this point just refer to that as ESG. And you mentioned that, and I know in the US, for example, increasing regulatory requirements for reporting on some of these factors, and those factors therefore may become risks to an organization, as you mentioned, should you not be complying to your promises or otherwise operating in line with evolving expectations about how a corporation should be complying. So the E, the environmental, this can get into your carbon footprint, other environmental manifestations of your operations. The S is a big one, and you've mentioned a lot of ways it comes in with just potential activism, socio-political factors that relate to your organization's impact on communities, societies, and whatnot. And then the G is the governance factor. How are you set up to lead and make decisions in your organization? You mentioned that with this regulatory environment, sometimes there's a box checking exercise that's going on. Can you comment just a little bit more now that we're in this prevention mode, and we've explained a little more about what ESG is, to just think about, in your informed opinion, how much of a risk ESG poses to firms and whether you advise your clients to be preparing to manage those types of risks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, so I think as I guess communications experts, we've actually come a long way. When I was studying communications, which was not really long ago, we talked about CSR, CSV. So that's corporate social responsibility and corporate shared values. That was the key kind of elements when, especially multinationals, looked at how to give back to the community, but also a little gadget they use as, a PR tool to kind of brand themselves as a giver, a contributor to the society where they operate. And now, years ago, ESG emerged or started to emerge as more of a buzzword. And that was more of a kind of ticking the boxes exercise. Some people call it the alphabet soup because there's a lot of elements in it, a lot of different standards, different compliance issues that come into play, especially in the US, the EU, and like I said, Asia is catching up on that. But right now, ESG has gotten a bigger kind of crown for itself. Our recent study from FTI Consulting actually found that 1/3 of C-level executives across the globe, they are experiencing or they expect to face ESG-related investigations in the coming months. So they now understand that it's not just a feel-good exercise or ticking the boxes exercise. They admit that they are under extreme pressure to improve ESG and sustainability. And that would, again, go back to the financial risks, the operational risks, reputational risks companies would face if they do not comply with the regulations or follow through with their ESG commitments that they've made in their annual reports or ESG or CSR reports. So in that sense, it's pretty critical for the companies to not just play by the rules that are set up by other people. They are putting out their own kind of standards, their rigorous kind of playbook, if you will, also not just as a prevention mode, but also to make sure that they are building a reputation for themselves and making sure that they're part of, doing the right thing and part of a society for a greater good of the society.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, with all of that guidance, we could increase the preparedness of a given firm. Still, sometimes crisis happens. So now I'd like to transition to kind of the second phase of this crisis management framework that we're discussing today, which has to do with the response. And in this part of the conversation, I would love for us to think about who's involved in this kind of phase of activity, what the best practices are for responding to crisis. And I'm wondering about different things, the role of PR, the role of an apology, the role of even tactical enablers. Some have spoken about, having a war room and, different things like this. So I'm going to just open it up and I'll, probe and follow up as you share with us, how can we evolve toward best practice in terms of responding to crises?
Mm-hmm. So I think in the first instance, two things really come into mind as a first responder to an issue, if you will, or a crisis. So one, you have to have a visible leadership that will, take the charge and lead a team of the business responding to the crisis and also heading into slowly, eventually, the recovery mode. But that leadership, say the CEO or the chairman, the top of the management team within the corporation needs to be supported by a task force. So we would call them the crisis response team, crisis management team, whatever you want to call it. That needs to be a very lean and nimble team of top level senior people in the corporation. That could include the chief financial officer, the chief HR, the head of HR, chief marketing officer, chief operating officer. They can come together, also head of legal, definitely, and also head of communications, if that's a separate function from marketing for some business, that's the case. They also need to come together in the preparation phase that is well prepared, equipped with a manual book, the playbook. They're trained, they've gone through simulations, they've gone through tabletop exercises to kind of understand how a real life crisis would look like. They would be trained from that simulation, come into a real response situation, knowing what they need to do, what roles they have as a decision maker or an enabler or a supporter sponsor of decisions, and also people who can kind of activate the local teams or separate function teams across regions or functions that can really, have a cadence of messaging the activities that are decided by the management team. So they need to know their roles really well in advance and be nimble in activation process.
That's incredibly powerful. So this crisis team with the leader at the top, you emphasized this should be, the CEO, the person is in charge. That's a lot of brass, as they say, a lot of high level. Why is it so critical that the team be literally defined from C-level?
That actually goes hand in hand with genuine, authentic communications, especially when responding to a crisis, because expectations for visible leadership from top companies, international businesses facing crisis situations, have proven to be successful, especially when the communications is genuine and that resonate with the key audiences across different regions, across different consumer sectors. Also, that goes a long way for the employees to understand the way the issue carries, and also the commitment of the management team to do the right thing and find the solution to the crisis, and also respond well for the good of the society, the consumers, the partners, but also the employees, so that the business can go on strong. Also, those are the ones that are on the top who can make decisions, who can also have influence or engagement with the board of directors, the investors, who are also critical stakeholders when a crisis is big enough. They can find a solution that could bring the company together and do a fantastic job when it's orchestrated correctly and strategically. And that shows also the commitment of the company overall to different stakeholders outside the company, that they are in it to do the right thing and really have a resolution.
When we talked about preparation, you came right out of the block thinking about values. Do values also play a role in the response phase?
Of course. And recovery, good that you mentioned that, is sometimes overlooked, because once the companies kind of come out of that tunnel, they feel like that's all dusted and done and it's all over. They move on to, day-to-day operation. That's actually a shame for a lot of the companies that I've worked with also, because had they had a chance to sit down, review what's just happened, and kind of go over the things that could have been done better, also to do a review of what we did, those align with our values, our proposition, the promises that we bring to the table to our customers, our stakeholders. Had they done that, that could have prevented another issue or crisis, and the next one that they would have. So you're right. Values come in as a very important element in the recovery phase as well. You need to make sure that you're updating your training playbook, materials for response, learning from the mistakes, and also reflecting on the values that you bring, and also realign your long-term brand aspirations and make sure that you communicate that well to your stakeholders by re-engaging them after the fact so that they know that you've come out of that issue stronger, and this is what you're going to do to prevent another mistake from happening.
Once you get through the heated environment of the crisis in play, you might get to what can be referred to as a recovery phase. And just to recap what you've talked about, you were mentioning that it's really important to just review what happened. So that, again, and it sounds again like the recovery is all about getting better prepared. So, what did we do that worked? What didn't work? What did we miss? Where did it get worse? What could we have done about that? And so a lot of recovery then is trying to be better prepared. Is that an accurate way to put it?
That's very accurate. It's not a linear process. It's a circle, an ecosystem goes on and on. It's circular, unfortunately. But reviewing what's done right, what's done wrong. Some of the tactics under that could be, engaging with your stakeholders, also understanding from them their perspective or reception of the response the company gave. One of the projects that I've done, which was also great, was a global crisis a multinational company went through in the automotive industry. After kind of coming out of some parts of the big crisis, we helped them go through internal audits, which meant that we sat down with some of the key employees across different functions, across different regions, to kind of interview them on what's changed, what they thought the root cause of the problem was, what role did they play or their seniors or other people played, and what could have done differently, how they assessed the company's response to the crisis, what could be different the next time, what could be some of the preventive measures the company could put in place, from leadership, from the board makeup to investor relations, to media relations, marketing, operation processes, and whatnot. So it's a full kind of exercise of going through stakeholders' comments and also perspectives.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Very proud to have been a part of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean. It's been a pleasure.